everyone. I'm John Evans, and welcome to another episode of One on One. Casey Roman has produced several award-winning documentaries and special reports in her decade at WECT. And if you've seen them, you know she goes in depth like few others ever have. Most of them have been on hard-hitting, crime-related issues. Her most recent piece, called Clearing the Air, is available right now on WECT.com, the mobile news app, and our channel on Roku. It's about hog farms and lawsuits filed against them. Before we get into our conversation with Casey about how and why she got into this issue, let's put it all into context for you. With two reports we aired on WECT News about the same time that her special report was launching on our digital platforms, WECT.com and our mobile news app.
It's a courtroom showdown that's been months, even years in the making.
25 lawsuits, hundreds of millions of dollars, all pitting neighbor against neighbor, all over how much damage can be done by the odor of a hog farm. In an exclusive investigative report, WECT's Casey Roman spent months talking to both sides. She toured farms. She'll be in federal court along with Bladen Online's Charlotte Smith. Charlotte saw the last verdict come down, a $473 million award to the farm's neighbors. She says no one would ever argue hog farms don't have a smell, but the farmers didn't get a fair trial. The jurors were not allowed to visit the hog farms in question. She says attorneys pushed the fact that big money Smithfield Foods is now owned abroad, without acknowledging that the family-owned farm would actually take the fallout.
He pulls up on the big screen, you know, here's this foreign company making billions of dollars, and here they are paying their executives millions of dollars, and these foreign people are causing this odor. And then the jury comes back and awards the 6 plaintiffs $473.5 million. That's almost half a billion dollars. No common sense.
The juries have found 3 hog farms guilty of being an odor nuisance. Smithfield has now pulled all their hogs. The 4th trial starts tomorrow. You can get the entire backstory right now in this exclusive investigative report on WECT.com. Tonight, the latest in a series of lawsuits against hog farms in North Carolina. It's underway. Day 1. The 4th of 26 lawsuits against Murphy Brown, which is the LLC of Smithfield Foods. WECT's Casey Roman went to Raleigh, where the fight over odors from hog farms continues in federal court.
After opening arguments today in the Raleigh federal courtroom, the judge dismissed everyone, including the jurors. So I decided to come out here to Scholler Farms. This is the swine farm, the hog farm, that is the 4th farm of 26 total lawsuits. This is neighbor versus Smithfield Food, and really if you unravel the details, it's also neighbor versus neighbor, because it's their neighbor, the hog farmer, who owns these entire operations. There were 2 things that really stuck out in court today that I wanted to talk to you about. And number 1 is who came first, right? Was it the hog farm that came first, or was it the neighbors who now live here who are now suing? Well, that is kind of tricky to answer. What we were told in court today was that at Scholler Farms in this area, that there are families that have owned these large swaths of land, and that was first. Well, one of the plaintiffs who is suing, they sold this land to Murphy Brown, Smithfield, who then built the farm here. So they sold it to the hog farm operation, and now there's a hog farm. And then later on, over the years, some of their family members inherited that land, and then they built houses there. So who came first? That's kind of hard to answer, but ultimately one of the plaintiffs sold this property to Murphy Brown LLC, and now there's a hog farm here. The jury really has a lot to learn, and that's really what today was all about in the courtroom. We spent 3 hours just trying to give the jurors who live in Raleigh an idea, an education of what it's like to live out here. I'm going to keep checking this out and getting some video. We're going to be following these court cases. We have a very large investigative report on WECT.com. It's called Clear the Air. It's going to give you lots of information of how these lawsuits came to be and possibly where they're headed. For now, reporting in Sampson County, Casey Roman, WECT News.
The how and why this time is with WECT's Casey Roman, who is behind that story. You've delved into the opioid epidemic. You've delved into prostitution. You've delved into homelessness. You've delved into beggars, people we see asking for money. Why hog farms? What got you into this?
I wanted no part of this story.
What got you into it?
Peer pressure. I knew that this was going on. Well, first I'll say that when we hear about lawsuits all the time in the newsroom, so a $25 million award, big court, like that does not register on, I think, our Richter scales necessarily, just because you hear about them so much. So there was the 25 million, there was the 50 million, and then there was 400, so that's 473 million, you know, that's going to get anyone's attention. But I didn't want, because it's not my thing. I mean,
Right.
if we were going to kick down the hog house door and like arrest all the pigs, like I'd be there in a heartbeat. But like this was not my arena, not agriculture. So I went to Bladen County for a totally unrelated reason, and this was right after the $473 million verdict. And everyone I talked to for that story said, "Would you please, you know, will you need somebody to do something on the hog farm?" And I was like, I'm so sorry that this is happening, but like this is just not my thing. And it said, well, just go talk to a hog farmer. Well, I've reported here for 10 years, and if you drive onto a hog farm with a camera, like you will find your way off the hog farm really quickly. You know, and for a lot of reasons, you know, typically they don't get reported on fairly. So this farmer agreed, and I went there and just thought that I'd get like one little interview, we'd throw it on air, and we were standing very far from the hog farms or from the houses, and he does his whole interview, and then he said, "Do you smell it?" And I said, "Smell what?" And he said, "You know, that horrible odor that's worth $473 million. And we stopped, and I didn't smell anything. And I was like, okay, like, you're right. I don't smell anything. Now, I've smelled a hog farm. We've all, if you live here, at some point, you've driven past and you smell it. But it's different than, you know, when you go down River Road and you pass the human waste and you have to, like, throw up the vents on your car because you're going to gag. I mean, it's like it smells like a barnyard. It's like a musty.
Right. Yeah.
So we finished up there, and then he said, well, I'll take you to the lagoon. Well, nobody wants to stand next to millions of gallons of hog waste. So I was like, you know, I'll just zoom in.
Yeah,
it's
I'll be back and
fine.
do that. Yeah.
And I went and I stood maybe a foot from the edge of the lagoon of millions of gallons of pig waste, and I didn't smell anything. And at that point, I was like, all right, this is clearly something more than what I've been reading, because when you actually read the lawsuits, it paints a picture that this is just an absolute nightmare out there. And in the 10 years that I've been here, I couldn't recall a time. Now, overflowing, you know, people have an issue with that.
Yeah, we've had those during storms and
Right.
stuff of that nature. Yeah.
But I couldn't remember a single time that someone said that I live next to a hog farm and I cannot go on. You know, it is just unbearable. So that's kind of how. And I tried to get out of this story quite a few times just because I knew that it was so big in scope.
And I mean, but you're not afraid of doing things that are big in scope. You've done them in the past, and you've gone out and you've, you know, done the stings with officers and prostitution and gone to the homeless areas. But as you delved into this and as you peeled back pieces of the onion, were you learning along the way? Were you trying to knock down the reputation of all hog farms? How did it proceed? Because what you came back with is really pro-farmer oriented.
Yeah. So that was the first farm, and then it kind of built upon that, and then word got out pretty quick that I was starting to go around and visit the hog farms, and let me add, I'm a vegetarian. So and that was another reason that I didn't want to be involved, because I didn't want my personal feelings to get in the way of all that. So that was the first farm, and I went to a couple more. Part of the reason I didn't want to be, when you do prostitution or opioids, and you're going through the door and people are being arrested, it's very easy. It's not easy, but those are bullet point stories. Who was there, what they did, what the charges were. It's very cut and dry. Trying to explain to viewers, and in this case, jurors in Raleigh, what something smells like is really difficult. Especially if you've never been to one. And that was, that's been the central issue here, is that these are not being tried in the area where the problem is. They're being tried in Raleigh. And so you're asking city dwellers in Raleigh to make multi-million-dollar judgments. They're not allowed to go to the hog farms. I could no sooner make a judgment on how people live in Raleigh than Raleigh can do for Duplin County. So it's inherently complex. So at this point now, I've been to a bunch of different hog farms, and I've stood on the banks of many a lagoon. And you cannot possibly make a clear decision one way or the other unless you go to these communities. You have to understand how they operate. Right. And it's different. It is different in Duplin County than it is in Wilmington, and it's certainly different than Raleigh.
Yeah. And so as you looked at it, were you concerned? Because we do many of these stories, and we do them, okay, we're going to balance this, we're going to put both sides on here, and then we're going to let viewer make the decision as to where they think one side versus the other. Were you concerned at all that what you were bringing back was being pro-farmer in many instances?
No, so I've certainly gotten the criticism that it was like all farmer-sided, and the plaintiffs will not interview.
No, I know. I was going to get to that. But
yeah, I mean, the attorneys won't interview. That's another reason I didn't want any part of this, because anything lawsuit is like banging your head against the wall to get someone to talk, and they won't talk. There was a gag order for the first half of my report, so nobody would talk to you. Yeah. So they're just difficult. The whole goal, the point that I was trying to get people to is understanding where your food comes from and how a hog farm works. Because if you just drive by and smell that, you would assume that it's always like that. Or when you're reading the literature and it's the words, the language, and we know how you say something can get people in a direction. If sewage and cesspool and feces and
waste they and sprayed and neighbors and odors and everything else.
Flies and buzzards. And if I had gone there and seen that, I would have done a story about how filthy these farms are. And it's just not what I saw. I mean, it just, I could not believe, when I'm holding the lawsuit and reading it, and then I'm standing there at a bunch of different farms, and I'm like, something is really off. Yeah. And so if I want people to understand, what it's like to stand in a hog farm, what you see in there. And that's, I was really, they don't want you in the hog houses. And the first time I was denied access to one, I was like, what are you hiding? I was about to wait for him to leave so I could crawl in the back vent and we'd have a big expose. And he said, well, you're covered in bacteria. And I'm like, it's a hog house. And he said, no, you're covered in new bacteria that they're not used to. And I don't want you getting my hogs sick. And he's like, so that kind of perpetuates this, that we've got something to hide. Yeah. And so I finally got into a few, and, it looked like a hog house. It smelled like a hog house. Yeah. But it's that language. And the first court case, we're now in the fourth one, when I went and sat in that trial, and I'm looking at the jurors, and every time that those words come up, we just have a visceral reaction because we're used to flushing it down a toilet, never having to deal with it. And I sat there and I thought, oh my God, I don't think these people have any idea what it's like to walk around a hog farm. And you have to know.
As you put this, I'm going to punch it up on the again on the website here, and as you presented this, it's presented in, at least video-wise. I mean, you've got great pictures here, but you present several little video vignettes along the way with some of the people here that you spoke with, and I think this may be
that's Charlotte,
the lady with from Bladen Online, Charlotte Smith. What was the reason behind doing the little video snippets? I mean, in the ones you've done before, you've done 48-minute pieces that run in prime time. You've done 28-minute pieces or 26-minute pieces that run in a half an hour.
Right.
You did this video-wise in what I can count 6 little video snippets, I guess, to interweave through this story. Why that way?
So we've got 26 lawsuits. We're on the 4th. This will go on, if this continues, if they don't settle, this will go on for years. And then the first 3 are in appeals court. So now take however long it takes to get through 26 lawsuits and then add all the time to get through appeals. And so I knew we needed kind of a living document that we could add to over time. Mm-hmm. And with the documentaries, they're a bit one and done.
Yeah.
You know, they air and they're, you know, we make a big rollout, but then, you know, that they're over. So this I felt like needed to be something that could grow on. In all the documentaries, I don't talk. I might open up and present, but unlike all my other stories, I never speak. And that's intent. It's very deliberate. And the same with these is because I don't want anyone to say that I, you know, it's a soundbite and then I took what they said out of context or I changed it. You know, I never speak during the documentaries. And so I wanted it to just be their testimony. This is what they said. And really the only editing that I did was to take out my questions
and the and some of that nature to make it flow a little bit better. What did you learn from Channing here, the hog farmer, who basically, you know, was he the first one that gave you access?
Yeah, he was the first farmer who would interview. And you really, I've had an easier time getting prostitutes and drug addicts to interview than I have for this story. I mean, just because there's so much on the line and because there was a gag order. So really why would you want to be the face of an interview about a multi-million-dollar lawsuit when you could easily be next? Right? I wouldn't. I mean, so, and as I drive around these communities, I would be shooting something at a farm and I'd turn around and like, there would just be like somebody there and they wouldn't tell me who they were or what, but they'd, you know, hand me a handwritten document about like what they think. And I mean, it was just bizarre. Like, it was just bizarre that this is between neighbors, like people who have lived next to, some of the plaintiffs have worked for the hog farms. I mean, these are people who have been intertwined. So Channing, again, his big kind of reveal was just drawing to my attention that I was at a massive hog farm and that I wasn't experiencing what was being, you know, the issue of the lawsuit, which was odor. And in another video, I go through how a lagoon works because I think people should understand how they work. You know, people say like, well, why don't they put water treatment plants? I was like, well, because your bacon will be $15. I mean, it's not really
$15 a pound, right? Yeah.
And they were spraying that day, and it is airborne, right? And so I said I want to get as close to this thing as possible so that I can smell it. And they were like, you can't go anywhere. So there's a shot. I mean, I literally got underneath the thing. Like, they were all laughing. But I just wanted to make sure that as close as I could possibly be to raw sewage flying out of a spray gun. And I still didn't smell it.
You did talk to Jessica Thomas, who is a resident of Duplin County.
Has a spray field in her backyard.
Right. And I thought it was interesting how you got her to talk, but yet none of the people that actually did the suing would talk. No, Jessica was great because so she has a spray field in her backyard. And she said what everybody else said is that, yeah, on certain times when they're spraying, if the wind is right, you will smell it. But it's just part of, it's no different than when the paper mill,
right? A couple times a year. It smells like a kitty litter
if you,
box
yeah,
outside.
if you catch it the right wind direction.
Yeah, and we all joke about it when we come in, and then it's over. So this is when she was driving me around, and I learned an awful lot this day because she took me from the farm that was being sued and then drove me to the nearest plaintiff, their house. And in some cases, we really had to make a drive. But in between that, we passed all these other houses, and those houses were not suing. Well, if this is a public health issue, if their water is in danger, or if breathing in these odors is toxic to them in any way, we would expect uniformity. Mm-hmm. We would expect entire swaths of, like Gen X, where everybody is affected in the same exact way. Mm-hmm. We're all at risk. But this is kind of cherry-picked. Certain houses are suing and certain houses aren't. And that I find really odd.
Yeah, that kind of throws up a red flag.
Yeah. Why are all these other people not on the lawsuit, but then these houses over here are? And furthermore, Smithfield growers are not the only hog growers in North Carolina. You have Prestige Farm, you have some smaller independent farms. Mm-hmm. All hog lagoons smell the same. All pigs poop the same odor. Mm-hmm. So why weren't the Prestige farms, why were they not sued? Why were the other farms not sued? They all have lagoons.
Why?
I can only tell you the theory because I don't actually know.
Right.
And the theory is because if you're going to have a tort lawsuit, which takes a lot of money and energy to host, you're not going to get a whole lot out of Prestige. Smithfield, huge company.
Right. And you point out early on, recently purchased by an overseas entity. Uh-huh. Even more money as a possibility.
Billions of dollars.
The one group you did get to speak was Reach.
Yeah.
And mm-hmm. Devon Hall. I think, am I pronouncing his name correctly?
Devon, yeah.
Devon. Why was he willing to go on and talk to you, do you think?
So he wasn't thrilled about it. I learned a lot from Devon. I really did. And he is very well-spoken. And according to him, they've had issues with the hog farms for years, and whenever they go to their county commissioners or anybody else, they don't get any help, and that may very well be true. I mean, we've certainly not heard about it, but if they've been getting, their local leaders have just said whatever, it's not our problem, that may be true. Whether or not that's worth $473 million is up for debate. But what surprised me most about his interview was I fully expected him to go in hard about the smells and the trucks and the flies. And instead, he said, we think there's a more environmentally friendly and neighbor-friendly way to do business, and we just didn't feel like we could get a response from this huge corporation unless we got in their pockets. And that may be true. I mean, right. Maybe they have been sending in, please don't spray on, hot summer days. And maybe they didn't get, I don't know. I don't live there. And I say that in here. Like, I'm not there 365 days a year. But he also said, we don't want to put the farmer out of business. The farmer is the collateral damage. Mm-hmm. Because on the lawsuit, it says Smithfield Murphy Brown. But the farm in question is owned by an independent family. So if you're suing Smithfield, the collateral damage of that is the farmer. Mm-hmm. And at this point, of the 3 lawsuits where the farm has been found guilty of being a nuisance, their pigs have been taken away. So they lost their opportunity to make a living at this point, right? Their way to make a living at this point. Yeah. And, those farmers, the houses, the infrastructure, they own that. Mm-hmm. So that loan bill still comes every month, and they have no way to pay it. Chuck Hustis of Bladen County's Economic Development Commission you spoke to as well. With farming being such a huge part, especially in the rural counties like the Sampsons and the Duplins and Pender, because one of the lawsuits came down and reached into Pender County, and obviously Bladen, it's got to be difficult for these people to sit back and watch this happen to an economy that is so vital to the rural counties. Yeah. And when this all kind of came to be, and I got some feedback from people in Wilmington about just that it's so awful that 30,000 pigs a day are slaughtered there, and anti-Smithfield, and I said, well, but in that county, in Bladen County, when Smithfield arrived, I mean, it was celebrated. We've done announcements when they've expanded.
Yeah.
And when you drive to the Tar Heel plant, it is like its own city. I mean, it is amazing to stand and just all these people and these huge employee parking lots, and I mean, so much of that community is rested on that company.
Yeah.
And so you have to be more sane than you can't celebrate the entrance of a major employer and then down the road after they've been ingrained into a community say, well, we're going to try to put you out of business and we don't want you here anymore. I mean, that's easy to say when you don't live there.
Right.
But there are families, generational, who count on that plant. If Smithfield packed up and said, we're not doing this anymore, we would have the Detroit agriculture. I mean, we would have empty hog houses, empty chicken houses.
And Chuck even said during your piece, or the piece you did with him, that these are good paying jobs.
Yeah.
They have jobs at
benefits.
good benefits. And again, people have made careers, and generations of families have made careers working for them.
Yeah. And, no one will ever argue that hog farm or hog production doesn't have an odor, or that Smithfield can't make improvements. But it's like we got from, what felt like zero on our end of not hearing about this to $500 million. And we're not even halfway through the lawsuits. And so even if they all get thrown out, or even if the plaintiffs are awarded oodles of money, these out-of-state attorneys are going to pack up and go home. And they'll be set for life after these lawsuits. But these communities will never be the same. And if you spend any time out in our rural communities, everybody knows everybody. Their kids all go to school together.
Yeah.
They work for one another. And they will, I don't think for generations they will heal from this. Because how do you possibly get over the fact that a bunch of your neighbors sued you for millions of dollars when, according to the farmers, they never had any issues, and according to the plaintiffs, you were always an awful neighbor?
When you put this all together, was there an element that you thought it still needed, or are you satisfied in this as much as you were satisfied in Flying the Sign and all the other ones that you've done?
I think it needs a plaintiff, at least one. I mean, I understand the nature of lawsuits. I get that. And that, once attorneys get involved, nobody really talks. But for what's on the line, for not just now, but for generations to come, if you are going to sue for that amount of money, in court you have to face your accuser. But entire counties are at stake, the livelihood of those counties. And I feel like you have an obligation, if you're going to sue for these amounts, to face all these people that will be affected. If the whole county was suing, it would be one thing, but it is 500 people of tens of thousands involved. And I feel like the onus is on you to represent what your attorney is saying in court, because not just the farmer is affected, all of his employees, all of his neighbors, the property values. If these companies and farmers go out of business, the tax base for the school system, like there's a lot on the line, and I think you have a responsibility to say something about that.
As you, and I've known you now for a decade plus, I know you don't go into anything half-hearted. I know once you get into things, you go in and you jump in with both feet. When it comes to a hog lagoon, you probably put boots on, but you jump in with both feet. Where does this one rank in pride, in being satisfied with how you started and what you ended up with?
I think the other documentaries were really to show people the thing that they weren't looking at, that was going on like right in their neighborhoods, and they were very high energy and a bit shock and awe given their topics. I think this is the only one where it actually immediately affects people's lives, and people who, in Wilmington and Raleigh are quick to forget about. Most people in Wilmington could not tell you where Bladenboro is. Mm-hmm. We just don't spend a lot of time out there. The irony of that is how dependent our communities here are on them.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think about where my food comes from, but it's just there. And when you see what it takes to not just hogs, but chickens and produce, and you forget that there's someone who has to do that every single day. I mean, they don't take vacations like we do. There's no 2 weeks off when you have 92,000 turkeys. Like, it doesn't work like that.
Like the gentleman who you profiled on Thanksgiving Day. And also, these are people whose children go to school. These are people who come to Wilmington to do shopping trips. They buy in the stores in the Lelands and the Bladenboros and the Elizabethtowns and the Clintons and the Wallaces. So there are those other 2 and 3 tentacles, and you pull the layers back, and it could impact a lot more than just immediate families.
Yeah. I think people have this idea that farmers are these like overalls and simple folk. They are extremely intelligent. I mean, I went to the permit meeting yesterday, and all these farmers are talking about copper and magnesium levels in the soil and like permeability of that. I was like, oh my God. Like, I mean, they really are like, they know everything about how these farms work. And a lot of people like to show videos on the internet of when someone like breaks into an animal house. And when you go into a hog house, if you choose to shoot certain things, you will get an outcome that you want. When you walk into a hog house, you're the new shiny thing in there, and like all the pigs rush up to to like get some attention. And so if I only shot really tight shots of video, it would look like they were stacked on one another because they are trying to like get to me. Mm-hmm. But they're not these ragtag operations where, they keep all these logs and registers, and it is very complicated.
You showed that the other day in the turkey piece that the truck had to the undercarriage of the truck had to get washed down before you went inside. You had to put on booties and a uniform just to walk into turkey house.
When we drove up and that thing turned on and I like hit the brakes, I'm like, what in the hell is this? And he was like, you have to go through it. And they get chlorinated water. I wouldn't drink our water.
Yeah.
Just think of it from like an economic standpoint. If your paycheck rested on the health and vibrance of an animal, wouldn't you want it to be the best possible animal when it went to, you're only getting paid if it's in great shape. Mm-hmm. That they don't do yoga with these pigs. That's how they make money, by putting the best animal forward and you're going to eat it. Yeah. So it doesn't actually make sense economically and financially to mistreat and not care for these animals. I'll also say that when I do documentaries, you're with people for long amounts of time, and it's what they do when you're not filming them that you try to pay attention to see where the actual truth is.
Sure, yeah.
And at every single farm that I visited, when I would put the camera down or take a break, I noticed that when a farmer would be talking to me, and we'd be making eye contact, and he would instinctively put his hand down and like touch the animals. You wouldn't do that if you didn't care. Like, that's a human to animal, almost, pet-like.
What you do with the dog around the house, yeah.
Right, and they all did it instinctively. And you don't have to do that if you don't care, and if it's just a commodity that you're selling. You would never do that if you didn't care. And stuff like that is what, I noticed while shooting this.
Wow, that's an interesting point and an interesting take on something like that you notice something that
yeah, because it would just be a product otherwise.
Yeah. Once again, it's called Clearing the Air, the latest investigative report filed by WECT's Casey Roman. As you can see, when Casey gets involved in an issue, she spares no expense on time involved to get to the story. It's available for you to see right now on WECT.com, our mobile news app, and the WECT channel on Roku. I'm John Evans. Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode of One on One.